And we'll go.
Are we good
Okay.
to go? Is everyone in?
Yes, and I'll keep an eye on the waiting room.
Okay, perfect. All right, welcome everyone to our webinar. Today we are talking about the Clearwater funding opportunity through the American Rescue Plan Act dollars that is focusing on emergency housing and social services. So we're going to walk you through the application process. We're going to give you some details about the grant, and then you'll have an opportunity to ask questions as well at the end. Next slide. So a few housekeeping items. If you do think of questions as we're talking, please put them in the chat and we will answer them at the end. And if there's anything that we don't have an answer to or that we're not able to respond to today, we'll get back to you afterwards. And also during the Q&A portion, you're welcome to raise your hand and ask the question live. Next slide. So my name is Jocelyn Howard. I'm the Senior Program Officer for PCF's ARPA work, and I'll pass it over to David.
And I'm David, the Director of Grants and Operations here at PCF.
So this is a quick overview of what we're going to talk about today. I pretty much already went over it, but we're going to summarize what this funding opportunity is and then how to determine if you're eligible, the process and timeline. We'll actually take you to the grant portal and look at the LOI together and then discuss technical assistance and how you would report your successes if you are chosen for this funding. So to give you some background about where this grant opportunity came from, Pinellas Community Foundation, or PCF, and the City of Clearwater are collaborating to distribute this money, which is from the American Rescue Plan Act, more affectionately known as ARPA. And this is really meant to expand emergency housing and social services programming in the City of Clearwater. So there's a total of $650,000 in this grant pool, and we have a minimum request size of $50,000 and a maximum of $325,000, and all of your funding would need to be spent in 24 months. We have also set some qualifying program areas. So these include a lot, but these are the program areas that we're going to be looking for proposals to cover. So housing, food security, dental care, mental health care and substance use, services for folks with disabilities, aging services and support, legal aid, and then services that are for youth and families.
And I would just add that the maximum award amount of $325,000 includes, so you're allowed to request a 5% indirect cost with this grant. That includes that. So if you were to request the full $325,000 without the 5% indirect cost, the grant would be a little under $310,000. Yeah, so it would be less, 5% less.
So this is the process. The letter of intent period has opened, so you're able to now submit your letters of intent through May 12th. We will have the external committee meeting to recommend letters of intent to move to full proposals on June 7th. And then the full proposal period would be right after that, from June 12th to July 12th. The full proposal committee will meet on August 3rd, and then contracting would probably happen later in August.
So pardon me, I'll take it over. Eligibility criteria. So this is slightly different from other PCF grant programs. There's slightly different eligibility criteria, so we want to make sure to point that out. You must be a 501c3 public charity and have had such status for 2 years, and there's a typo, but 2. At the time of application. A lot of other grant programs just say for at least 1 year. For this one, it needs to be at least 2 years. And there are certain public charities that do grant making themselves or fundraise for another entity. Sometimes government agencies have a fundraising entity. Those are not eligible to apply here. So government agencies are not eligible, nor are their fundraising counterparts. And grant makers are also not eligible. You must have a demonstrated history of already providing emergency housing and social services to individuals in Clearwater in those program areas. So there is a part on the rubric that we'll show you that talks about showing a demonstrated history of being in Clearwater, and you must not be prohibited from contracting with the City of Clearwater. So now we'll take it over to the grant portal. I'm skipping right to the LOI. So we're assuming just for the sake of brevity on the webinar that you have an account on the grant portal or that you will be able to register. Please feel free to reach out if you have any difficulties getting in, either to myself or Jocelyn, and we'll get you started. I'll make this one a little smaller. So we do offer a Word version that you can use to draft your application. I know, sometimes there are team members that want to provide input, so you can pass it around internally. There's that Word version. We've just also posted the rubric that will show you after going through the letter of intent. And so you can use to kind of see what we're looking for. So start off with a project name. You don't need to get descriptive here. It could be housing services in Clearwater. Don't spend a lot of time on that. Amount requested. So as Jocelyn said, the minimum is 50,000 and the maximum grant amount is 325,000. If you request that full amount, there is a question about impact. Later on, you really have to show significant impact. And if you want to talk kind of budget over, feel free to reach out to Jocelyn. Also, we would recommend that if you are a smaller organization and your operating budget is under 50,000, you do qualify to apply. However, part of the rubric is going to be about proportionality to your operating budget. So you probably would not get an award of more than 50,000, and it would be more reasonable of you to just request 50. If you want to talk through that again, Jocelyn's happy to speak with you about that. And then right below it, we ask for your annual operating budget, and then a grant start date and an end date. So the maximum grant period is 24 months, but we're really allowing you to select the range. We would probably expect a minimum of 12. So really between 12 and 24. We want to see a realistic spending period, and also time for kind of the impact of the grant to settle and to kind of show up. Then your mission statement, just brief, the 1 or 2 sentences that shows up on your 990 is your mission. Asking about being headquartered in Clearwater. This isn't a determining factor, but we may prioritize organizations headquartered in Clearwater. So it isn't a disqualifying factor, but it is considered. Then the programming background. You really want to describe here the nuts and bolts of what the proposed programming does, and how it relates to your mission. It may be very inherent if you have a mission of eliminating hunger, and then the programming is about food insecurity. That would make sense. But if there's there's even a nugget of doubt that we're not going to be able to, that we're going to assume mission drift, really spell out its connection to your mission. History in Clearwater. So this is the when and how in Clearwater and what. So what you've been doing in Clearwater, how long you've been doing it, that's what you want to put there. Outcomes. If you've applied for our operating grants before, same thing here, copied and pasted from our operating grant application, because has been effective in helping committees make decisions. This is not an output, so this is not about how much service you're providing, but rather how the client is going to be impacted by those services. It doesn't need to be long, but it needs to show how, the change that will happen, the amount of change or the amount of clients that will show that change, and how, during what time period that will be, that change will show up. We're not prescribing outcomes, but we want to see realistic and time-bound outcomes. And then measurements. So how are you going to know that that outcome has been achieved? Again, this is copied and pasted from our operating grant application. If you're applying for similar programming and you've been funded through operating grants, it's not a guarantee that you'll be funded here, but it does show, oh, you're on the right track with outcomes and measurements. And again, we want to know maybe how often you're measuring and how you're doing that measurement. If you use a validated tool, that will be stronger for your grant request. And then grant impact. So how would this grant help your organization and its clients achieve the outcomes that you've just stated? And what would you be able to do with this funding that you otherwise could not? So we want to know, how is this going to help your organization? And how is it going to broaden your impact on your clients? And then a preliminary budget narrative. This can just be line item, maybe a brief description of what that line item means in case it's vague, and then how much. You would also include the indirect cost here of the 5%. And then we would request a formal budget we may prescribe a template, we might not, we haven't made that decision yet, on the full proposal. And then a reduction in funding. There won't be, obviously, at the letter of intent decision meeting, there won't be a funding decision, but they will consider how reduced funding could impact your program. The committee may want to spread funding across more organizations, in which case they may partially fund. If that makes what you're proposing impossible, it is possible that that would get it kicked at this stage. So it is something to consider. I'll briefly show you the rubric, just to show you what we'll be looking at. Gotta get the PDF up. I'm not going to spend too much on this because I've detailed it as we've gone along. One second. Being stubborn. There we go. So this is the rubric, again, that is available at the top of your application, so don't feel the need to absorb it all here. The amount requested in annual operating budget, 0 to 10 points. Actually, all of these are 0 to 10 points. Just, is your amount requested proportional to your annual operating budget and doesn't exceed the maximum request amount? And it seems appropriate for what you're going to be delivering. So the committee will be looking at that amount requested, the preliminary budget narrative, and what programming you're offering, and then saying, does that all kind of click together? Mission, is it in alignment with your mission, which is why I said if there's any nugget of mission drift, address it in your programming background. And this is important as well. This is for emergency housing and social service needs. There is a sense that you'll be addressing urgent client needs. The history in Clearwater, the strong outcomes, again, specific, measurable, realistic, and time-bound, and that they can be measured accurately with the measurements that you describe in your letter of intent. The grant impact, so it's clear that it's addressing an urgent need, and that it's benefiting the clients for achieving those stated outcomes, and then that the preliminary budget narrative makes sense. So it's a total of 70 points. The way this will happen at the committee level is there will be a ranked list, and then committee members will discuss and decide which proposals to move forward. I'll go back to the PowerPoint now and turn it back over to Jocelyn.
We are here for you to answer any questions as you move through this process. We really want to make sure that everyone who's interested and who qualifies has the tools to submit a really strong competitive application. So you can contact me at any time if you want to schedule a one-on-one conversation. You can send written questions as well. So we're here for you as you work on the LOI. So this is an important note that we want to elevate here. If you are awarded this funding, we're going to be using verbal reporting. And this is essentially a way for us to kind of co-create how you'll report on successes and milestones. And each reporting meeting that we have, which would probably be quarterly, you would kind of answer the questions that we've determined together. We will take notes, and then you as a grantee would see those notes and then later approve them. So we found this to be a really effective way to stay in conversation with grantees and also get really meaningful reporting information. We will still require invoices that document your expenses. So this is kind of more standard financial reporting that would still be in place. And we are always glad to provide TA on that invoicing if you need it. Next slide. So this is a note on transparency. This is how we're operating all of our ARPA processes. We want you to know that all requests that you submit for funding will be shared on our website, as will recordings of all meetings, like David mentioned at the beginning, and executed contracts will also be published. So we just want you to be aware of that up front.
Turn it over for any questions. Stop the screen share.
I don't see any in the chat. So if you have a question or clarification, feel free to raise your hand.
Oh, we got a thumbs up. So good overview. Good.
Great.
I'll give it about 30 more seconds. Okay. Okay.
I have a question.
Oh, hello.
Hello. So when it says housing and social services, is it required that, is the purpose of this grant primarily for emergency housing? Or if you're mostly involved in the social services arena, would that be appropriate to do that, and maybe that you don't do housing as well?
So those are the subject areas that Clearwater wanted to emphasize, but it doesn't have to be housing and social services.
Okay,
So
thank
as
you.
long as, yeah, as long as you fit into one of the program areas that was outlined earlier in the PowerPoint, then you're in good shape to apply.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we're good. Great. Well, thanks everyone for attending. We'll post this recording shortly on the website and at the top of the letter of intent for you to view probably by tomorrow at some point. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for attending.
Bye-bye.